there, my name is Megan and welcome to my channel. This is my husband Mike, and today we're going to be doing a book review for King of Torts by John Grisham. We read this book together, and this is my third John Grisham book, which, how many of you have you read?
Oh, probably 4 or 5.
Yeah. Okay, I've read The Runaway Jury and The Pelican Brief.
I don't know if I can name all the ones that I've read just off the cuff like that, but yeah, I've read quite a few.
Okay, do you like him as an author?
Yeah, I think overall for my style of reading, I think that, John Grisham does a pretty good job of, creating and painting pictures of what real life law or, criminals and how people go about investigations. So yeah, that really speaks to me, and it's very, synonymous with things that I watch, things that I read, etc.
Yeah, he watches way more like law shows and movies than I do, so he knows way more about it than I do personally. So I don't know, courtroom dramas aren't really my thing as much as him, but I wanted to read this book because it has to do with corruption in like these pharmaceutical corporations, which is what spoke to me. The way that I structure my book reviews is I discuss the plot and then the things that I liked and didn't like, and then we're going to discuss some themes and ideas that John Grisham presented in this book. So if you're interested in skipping to any one of those particular sections, then check the timestamps down below. So in King of Torts, we are following a protagonist named Clay Carter, and he's currently a public defender working in Washington, D.C., and he's not really happy with that job. He represents criminals, and he also is engaged to a girl named Rebecca, whose parents come from a little bit of, elite prestige, and they're not really happy with her choice in Clay as a future fiance or husband for her. One day, Clay is approached by a mysterious figure known as Max Pace, and he has insider information about a bad drug that a pharmaceutical company was producing and involuntarily giving people. And he basically offers him all of this money, a new office, all of these incentives to take this case on, and Clay agrees because he no longer wants to be a public defender. And this leads him into the world of mass tort litigation, which are big lawsuits, kind of like class action lawsuits, civil lawsuits. And he starts to take on all of these cases, and he doesn't have the experience or background to really be dealing with them. And it just draws him into a world of greed and corruption as he's dealing with these bigger and bigger cases that he doesn't have the experience to handle. And it also changes Clay as a person. And then we also have the mystery of Max Pace and who he's working for, and kind of how these pharmaceutical corporations are doing things that are wrong and immoral and getting away with it. And Clay becomes involved in that as well. Do you want to add anything? Did I forget anything?
No, I think too, when you think about what happens in this story, like, John Grisham paints a really good picture of all of these characters and really how this type of law exists, right? What's happening out there. Like Megan said, there's a ton of stuff that you don't think as a normal, regular person. Like all these things happen in these pharmaceutical companies in addition to these lawyers, and, who approaches who, how things get done. So he does a really good job of explaining all of that in the book.
Okay, so what are the things that you liked about the story or the book or the writing or?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I really enjoy John Grisham as an author. I think he does a great job painting the picture of, really how this law comes about, right? How these things can happen in the real world. There may be a real world case. Typically in this book in particular, he starts out with some sort of hardship case that's happening to a character and really digs into that case. In addition to that, what he does is he paints a picture of how an everyday lawyer can go about receiving this case. What are the steps in, moving forward through the case? So really does a great job in the details when it comes to that stuff. I think sometimes when he's digging into the characters, he really tries to really hone in on who the main character is and what their mindset is at when it comes to, receiving these cases. So he does a great job of creating that style of step by step by step, just narration. Yeah, I mean, it's really good stuff.
Yeah, I like how Clay was a believable character because I feel like anybody who's presented with an opportunity to do a morally gray thing and receive lots of prestige, lots of money. He receives like a whole brand new office and staff. Like, would you do something that is morally gray in order to receive those things? I think a lot of people would, because Clay didn't know exactly what he was doing was, 100% wrong, but he knew it was shady, and he still agreed to do it because he wanted to impress his fiance's parents. He wanted to kind of live up to the name. His dad was a lawyer, his dad's name, and he just was tired of being, looked down upon as a public defender. So he was willing to compromise, his integrity in order to receive power and influence.
Well, and then there's kind of the other side too, where it's like he was able to justify this moral compass by saying, well, I'll be doing a lot of good things for other people when I receive this money, and I'll be helping out the people that work for me in my firm, and I can hire all the folks that, you know, already work at this other place where they don't make any money, and I can take care of the people that, you know, I'm leaving behind and things like that. So yeah, there was that part of it, but then, you know, there's the other part where he's trying to build this status so he can impress his fiance, or you know, ex-fiance.
Ex-fiance. They broke up.
Yeah, and so he's trying to become, you know, something that he, you know, for the lack of a better term, he dislikes all of these people. You can tell from the beginning of the story. There's a lot of disdain for people with money. There's disdain for that type of, you know, prestige. But then he's still chasing after it so that he can impress his ex-fiance. So.
I also like just the portrayal of mass tort litigation. Like, you see all of these commercials on TV all the time. Like, if you have taken this drug or if you have been affected by this thing, then call this number and you could be entitled to a compensation. So just seeing the background information of that, of how a lawyer would go about starting these lawsuits and what that entails, I found really interesting. I honestly knew nothing about it. So I learned a lot about, I guess, the legal side of it, which I didn't know. You might have known more than I did.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, like I said, John Grisham does very well, just painting the picture for each and every step of how the case would portray, but also the lawyers that would be involved, right? Like, they even talk about early on in the book, you know, how he would set up this practice, how you would, you know, hire this many lawyers to do this. You're going to do commercials. You're going to
how much it would
cost, what the advertising would be, and this is millions and millions of dollars worth of setup just to get to a point where you could possibly have a mass tort case. And so, yeah, all those steps, I think, like I said, he does a great job painting that picture for the reader. So.
Okay. Did you have anything that you didn't like about the book?
Yeah, so it's funny, you know, like I said, I've read a few other John Grisham books, and a lot of them are really good. This one to me kind of was in the middle somewhere, right? We'll talk about ratings, I assume, at the end, but, you know, realistically, this one had a lot of foreshadowing, like a ton of foreshadowing in it. There were times where I felt like the character was, you know, vapid and didn't have, you know, real just sense, right? He was
dumb.
He made really stupid decisions that I don't think normal people would make given the same situation. But also the foreshadowing of like what could happen or what's to come was just very easy to see. So, you know, when you're thinking about the pros of the book and all the standard, you know, lawyer pros, you're like, okay, if you watch a lot of TV shows or you read a lot of books in this case, you would see a lot of that stuff coming. So there's a situation where, you know, he makes a really bad trade in the stock market based on advice from Max Payne, and then you're like,
is it Pace or Payne?
Payne.
Okay, we'll just call him Max.
Yeah,
I can't remember
Max.
now.
But he makes this bad decision about this stock market trade, and in my brain I'm like, that's insider trading. Something's going to happen, and then of course down the line that happens. So things like that. I thought there was some poor foreshadowing, and then I thought there was also some, you know, just bad judgment by some of the characters in the book that lead to other things.
Well, like he kept saying, he's like, all these good things are happening to Clay and it's going his way. Eventually it's going to unravel and, you know, something bad's going to happen to him. And that's exactly what happened. And then we also talked about like the characterization, or I guess the relationship between Clay and his ex-girlfriend, ex-fiance, whatever. Like we were talking about that and laughing about how badly it was written.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
So Clay has broken up with his girlfriend, Rebecca, and then Rebecca's parents kind of set her up with this guy they think that is suitable for her. And after a month of knowing each other, they get engaged. And then Clay ends up asking his roommate, who he hired to work at his new practice, if he knew any women, because his roommate's like a womanizer. And he's like, yeah, I know this lingerie model. And Clay starts dating this lingerie model and then takes her to Rebecca's wedding, and they weren't even invited. And the whole thing was weird and awkward, and it would never in real life happen. And like the two of them are dancing, which wouldn't happen, and they're talking about like how good in bed her new husband is or something. It was just a weird, awkward situation that would never happen. The dialogue was clunky. It was just laughable. We were just laughing about it. It was so bad.
Yeah, I think that part of the story was pretty
it was just bad.
It was just bad. And overall, like no guy would, you know, he plays the jealous boyfriend really well, right? He writes the jealous boyfriend well, but what he doesn't do is the dialogue around how the conversation would take place is really poor, right? It's almost like he didn't sit down and have a conversation with another woman about, hey, how would this play out? Because that would have really helped.
I don't think a guy would even talk like that.
No, he
Like,
just wrote a lot of things in there that probably wouldn't happen. Like there's no, I would never say some of the things that he said,
no
and I don't
one
think
would.
most men would either. So
He just did these stupid things trying to impress people, and it was dumb. And then I personally would have liked to see more, I guess, representation from the pharmaceutical corporation and the actual drugs that they were making that were bad. This focused more on the legal side of it. I would have liked to see the more like science side of it, but I know that's not John Grisham's like area of writing. So that's why I went into the book, because I wanted to learn about the drugs that they were using and exactly how they were bad and all that. And it was touched upon, but not to the depth that I was personally looking for. But it's a legal drama, so I shouldn't expect that anyway. So
yeah, overall, I think standard John Grisham novels are usually a little bit longer than this one. This one was a pretty quick read, but you get a lot of that detail in some of the other stories, right? Like there are times where he goes into each and every step of how a judge would think about a case, or a lawyer would think about a case, or even what the criminals are thinking before the things happen. In this book, it felt very, you just touch on it and move on, touch on it and move on. So I thought the pace of the story, although very quick, at times needed a little bit more just detail in the overall just world building and characterization of some of the characters. I think some of them, you get a good sense for a few, but you don't really get a good sense of where everybody is at.
moving on into some of the ideas and themes that we both really garnered from reading the book was the idea of greed and corruption, both on Clay's end, and I also think on the law firm's end, because we see how these law firms specifically target these companies and go after them for billions and billions of dollars. And the first case that Clay took with the drug that was for the arthritis, was that it? And it was causing like bladder tumors? Or was that the second case he took?
That's the second case. Yeah.
So one of the issues with that, and this kind of got Clay in hot water at the ends, was that he was taking... No, this is the one where he was doing the lead and the paint.
Wow.
One of the cases, he was taking a very large lawyer fee, like chunk of lawyer fee, and it was said, it was addressed that if he lowered the amount of money that he took, then he could have given out like a larger settlement to the people, and they actually could have like fixed the problem. But because he was being greedy, he refused to do that, and he created a lot of enemies. That was this small town. It was the brick mortar.
So that's the brick company, yeah. So that's kind of later on in the book. I mean, I think when we dig into some of the corruption and the greed, I think so. Just to kind of start, Clay gets, when he's thrown into this mass tort lawyer situation, he goes to these courses, right? It's recommended by Max that he goes to these courses and kind of learn about mass tort pretty quickly. And so he does that. And when he's there, he's just disgusted by all of the lawyers talking about how much money they're getting from their crappy clients and this and that, and they're going to screw everybody. And so there's this whole just blanket of just eeriness and grossness about it, right? And he's very disgusted by it in the beginning. And so he's, they're talking about how big their planes are, like she said, how much money they're going to make, and their suits and their women and all this stuff. And it's just like a big frat environment, and it's just very gross, right? So that's in the beginning, but then later on, as he continues to get into it,
he becomes that way.
Yeah, Clay becomes that, right? And so that just brings in that corruption piece. It's like money is the root of all evil, and he falls right into that story. And so he basically builds the same thing they have. He follows suit. He listens to them. He even starts dining with them and doing all these things, which lead him to a place where he doesn't want to be, and yet he's almost pushing himself towards it each and every time, because he does love the money. He does in his brain say, I'm going to do all these things with it, and then he just goes and does all the things those guys did. He buys houses in Europe, and he does all these things that nobody would do if they had this much money. Like the normal person thrown into this much money this quickly, you would think would have some sense to stock some of it away and move it where you need to, especially if you come from nothing to get there, right?
And we do see that. So when he first sets up his law firm, the people that he hires, he compensates them very well to the point where they can retire and stop working. So we see how they had the, I guess, common sense to not keep pursuing money, kind of like stop and just live their life. And then at the end, we see that Clay does have a moral compass, and he eventually realizes that this pursuit of wealth wasn't going to fulfill him, wasn't going to make him happy. And what was most important to him was relationships and people, because he, still
Yeah.
in love with Rebecca. So he does kind of have a moral compass that just gets redirected throughout the book.
Yeah, and kind of going back to what you said about the brick and mortar company, there is a situation where they're sitting in the room together and they're hammering out the deal and they're trying to figure out, how to save this company, which is tied to this town.
All the
And if
people work for this
yeah, and if the
company.
town falls apart, or if the company falls apart, the town falls apart.
Hmm.
And so any normal human being with a heart would say, hey, listen, I can take a lesser fee to keep the company going. We do have to take something because our clients are owed something. But the deal was easy. It was a
Yeah,
no-brainer,
they
right?
could have still compensated everybody, and everything would have worked out. Clay would have gotten paid. The people would have gotten, their damage. Everything would have worked out. But he was just being selfish, and he was like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm going to take more money," and the company couldn't survive it.
Yeah. And
People
and
lost their jobs.
and you learn later on that the biggest thing about mass tort, the one thing you don't want to happen is the company to claim or file bankruptcy, because then nobody gets anything. And this moron pushes everybody to bankruptcy in that case, and he again takes the loss on that one, right? So this is that part of
The greed.
the unraveling. Yeah, he gets so greedy that he just unravels everything that he's built, and it just doesn't work out.
And then there's also some things brought up regarding the legal system and some critiques of it. I am not that well versed in the legal system, but one of the things that stood out to me is that Clay took a case about another pharmaceutical company that was given this drug for arthritis, and it did cause tumors in people's bladders. But I think 99% of the time they were benign. Granted, you still don't want bladder tumors. So he decided to reach out to all the people who had taken this drug, and he gets a couple of clients, and one is this old man. And basically, Clay doesn't tell him that the tumors are benign. He makes the people think that they are going to become cancerous. So this poor man is thinking he's going to die and going through all of this emotional turmoil and his family and everything. And at the end, his settlement was only $50,000, and Clay had made it seem like his settlement was going to be a lot more than that. And the man was really upset. He's like, I have these, bladder tumors. You made me think I was going to die, and I only get $50,000. And then Clay's firm's response was, well, in our contract, it said we could settle for anything over $50,000. 50,000 was the floor. And it left a bad taste in my mouth the way that Clay's firm handled that case, because at first they made it out like they really cared about these people and that they wanted, to help them with their health, but it was just all about money.
Yeah, and you see this all the time when you think about, and this is why lawyers have such a bad rep, right? When you think about this type of lawyering, they go out and they seek out these individuals. They're on a list somewhere, on a doctor's list, and then they call them. They make calls. They bring them to facilities. They have them tested. The good news is that company did find, and that's the moral dilemma piece, right? You feel like as the lawyer you're doing the good thing. The good thing is we found this. The person can have it treated and removed, and all of that, and then they think they're going to have to, they're going to receive all this money because they've been treated improperly, or they receive a drug that has some very bad side effects, but in fact they do not, right? And the lawyer does reap the benefits in these mass torts. You put all these people together, each and every settlement is worth a certain amount of money, and their percentage is into the millions of dollars, and then their clients receive a small piece of that millions and millions of dollars. And so, in the end, the person that ends up taking the brunt of it is the client, right? The client never receives what they should receive. However, if they had gone about it and not done a mass tort and done an individual case, then they could have received,
or not. So.
yeah, they could have received zero, which is, one
but
way.
most people don't have the money to hire a lawyer for an individual case.
Yeah. And so there's all these dilemmas around the legal system in this book. It really does paint a picture of, how that, system is built not for the people who need to be represented, but more so for the lawyers, and how the lawyers can make out. And it does paint a really good picture of that through the story.
It's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you need a lawyer, this might be your only avenue. You might not be able to afford single representation, and you might at least get something. So, and then another thing that I always found interesting and was touched upon and a couple times in this book was the fact that Clay never even stepped inside a courtroom.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like he, even from the beginning, when he was an actual lawyer, he was representing, the very first client, which is Tequila Watson, and he just immediately in his head is thinking, how can I plead this out? How can I get out of this case so that I don't have to go to court? And he goes through all of this stuff, the entire book, about being a lawyer, and he wants to be this great lawyer, and he wants to do all these things, never once sets foot in a courtroom. And then the one opportunity that he does get to plead his case and go to court and do all those things, he chickens out and he doesn't do it. And, that really was a big telltale for me. It's like when you're writing a character and you want the character to have this moral compass and be this great guy and do all these things, like every single time I took a look at this character, I was like, this guy is just not a good man, and he's making bad decisions, and he's scared of his own job, and he's not versed in his craft. It was just a really bad character all the way through the book.
Yeah, he wasn't likable.
No.
But I also think it was interesting, the way that this book was written kind of shows the negatives of our legal system, how most cases aren't heard before juries, most cases are settled. So I just, the truth of it. Okay, so we're going to kind of touch on the ending of the book and kind of Clay's character arc. So we are going to be discussing spoilers. So.
Yeah, so I think, as I, read through this book and got through all of it, there's a lot of it that really did, make me feel a lot better about the book, and then kind of how disappointed I was in the ending, right? So there's a couple of opportunities where, John Grisham has the chance to really turn it around in the story, and he could have made it right with the brick company. He could have done what was right by Clay, and Clay could have settled the other case or dropped the cases, and he still had all these hundreds of millions of dollars, and he could have used that money for good, and he could have done all these things. He did none of that, right? He let everything play out in the worst way, and there's a point in the book where he gets jumped by this group of individuals from this
that small town.
Yeah, and they beat him.
They lost their jobs.
Yeah,
and
they lost their jobs, their homes, all these things, and they beat him. Yeah, they beat him within an inch of his life. He ends up in the hospital, and he finally has this moral epiphany of, I'm doing all of these bad things and it's affecting other people. And so I think in that moment, he realizes all the things he should have done or could have done.
But he still doesn't go back and fix it.
Right, and he never does, right?
He's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to take my money and go live a peaceful life. But he still didn't right the wrongs he did. Yeah,
and the whole time he's talking about, like, his ex-fiance comes and she's still married. So there's that whole weird dilemma of
their whole relationship, like,
yeah, a married woman would not come sit by the bedside of her ex-fiance and still complain about her husband, and while his girlfriend is in the room.
It was so weird.
It's such a awkward dynamic of writing. And then he's all fantasizing about, let's just run away together and live on a beach somewhere and do all these things, and it's just the whole thing.
First off, if I was a woman, I wouldn't want a man who was that easily influenced by money and power and all of that. I feel like that's just not the person I would want. But also, like, just everything he did, like, I don't think I could respect someone who didn't do the right thing when they had the opportunity to.
And I think too,
or at least fix it.
The thing we're leaving out is there's his entire journey through this book is documented in all of the legal pages, and there's the press is all over this, and they talk about him all the time, and they're painting this negative picture. I think one of the good things they do say is, like, how she remembers him as somebody who, who he was versus who he is today. And again, that whole hospital trip kind of brings that back. But, in the end, the whole thing really, to me, it was just weird. Like, I would not have written an ending like that. I would have given the character an opportunity to make it right. All these great things happened in the beginning of the book. All these terrible things happened, towards the end. And then the wrap up is just so
it was unsatisfying to me. So, if you had to give this book a rating, what would you give it?
Oh, man. So, like I said, I've read some other John Grisham books that I really loved, and that kind of brought me to this one when you were talking about rating it. I was like, oh, yeah, we can do that together. I would probably give this one like 2.5 stars.
Yeah, I think I gave it 3 in my initial, when I was thinking about it. I liked the mass tort litigation portrayal, even the, how these guys get so wealthy and how they're able to
manipulate the system,
and go after these companies with these cases, and kind of how it all plays out. But I didn't like Clay as a character. I found him a bit unbelievable. I'm not sure anybody would be that susceptible to corruption, and I didn't like the relationship with Rebecca. So the characters I didn't like, but the portrayal of the legal system and all of that I did like. So I gave it a 3.
Yeah, and I feel the same way, right? So I think the characterization was a little off. I think that, the story itself was really good. I think that as you walk your way through the legal system, all of those things were outlined very well and very believable, right? All of these things from how the law is set up is very believable, and you could see it today. But how the characters would react to the situations, I thought was very unbelievable. I thought nobody would make these kinds of awkward or stupid decisions, and if they did, I mean, he's a patsy the whole way, right? Like, you would start to think in your brain, something's not right here the whole way. So if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
He was a dummy.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, that is our review slash discussion for King of Torts by John Grisham. You guys will have to let us know in the comments if you've read this book, your thoughts on it. Maybe if you have some John Grisham book recommendations that you'd like us to pick up. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in another video soon. Bye.